from time to time. And my students in the past will be like, hey, you need to record. And I've also been known to, instead of stop recording, actually stop the stream and stop the Zoom. So if at the end of the class you just suddenly lose me, you'll know that I hit the wrong button. But anyway, so we're going to start with nouns. We're going to go over a few of the parts of speech. And just make sure we reinforce, the different parts of speech. And we'll go over to essential and look at subjects and verbs. This is going to basically follow on and build on this idea as we start looking at building simple sentences and things. And Nautica, I just mentioned, I thought you were already in here. For our first lesson here, we're working with Paxson and we're using Unit 4, Lesson 1. So it's going to be now right off the top. And of course, you could go on and do the workbook for the rest of that lesson. But also make sure that you stay for the essential part, because it's going to be a little bit different. We're going to move on and start adding to our skills there. So our little bit of audio, we'll go ahead and start that. So that's one thing to keep in mind with nouns. First off, there's a whole pre-GED section in Essential about capitalization. We could review that later. I can assign them individually if you want some help with that. What I always tell my students about capitalization when it comes to, do I capitalize that first letter? The rule of thumb, is it a specific person, place, or thing? So, if it's, like Arkansas, right? A specific place. If it's somebody's name, right? It's a specific person you're talking about. If I say I'm, going to the store, I don't capitalize store. If I say I'm going to Target, I capitalize Target, right? It's always specifics. And then, there's other things as far as like titles of creative works. So television shows, movies, books, those are all capitalized well when you're talking about specific, books and things like that. And again, if you want some more help with that, I can assign that later for capitalization. But I just thought, maybe that's something that we could pass on this time. But nouns, right? Person, places, things, or ideas. It's things. It's solid objects. It's it could be ideas too. But and then singular forms. When we're talking about one person, when we're talking about one place, when we're talking about one idea or one thing, that's the singular form of a noun. This gets, when it comes to subject and verb agreement, is where we want to make sure that we understand the difference between plural and singular forms. Sometimes when it gets tricky is when you're talking about collective nouns, right? So a team, right? Like my daughter's softball team, it's made up of 10 girls. There's 10 individuals there, but as a collective noun, we would consider that singular. It's just a team, right? It's one idea. Now they're going to a game tonight, there'll be 2 teams. So then it becomes plural. Say jury is another great example, right? Jury's made up of 9 peers. And so, but as a whole group, it has a singular identity, right? Unless we're talking about multiple juries, which would be a collection of more than one group of people. So sometimes those can get a little tricky, especially when it comes to that subject verb agreement, because your verb has to take on a certain form to agree with the subject. We're going to start getting into that as we go along in our class here. So rules for singular and plural. I want to make sure that we review this before we get into the subject and verb lesson. So a couple tables here to remember. So these rules, right, change nouns from singular to plural. There's multiple ways that we do that in English because English sucks and it's hard to learn. But one of the most common ways you're going to find that we take verbs and make them plural is just by adding an S, right? Perfect example they have here, book and message. We change that to books and messages, plural, right? Now we're talking about more than one book. We're talking about more than one message. Or ES. We had a gentleman by the name of Dan Quell, who was our vice president under George H.W. Bush, and he did not know how to spell potato because he thought potato had an E at the end. But the singular form of potato just has O, right? P-O-T-A-T-O, hero. But when you're running in, particularly when a word ends with an O, and sometimes other vowels, you'll add an ES. Right, so here, their example, hero and potato, you add ES, heroes and potatoes. I'll pick on Dan Quell a lot, maybe, as we go along in the class, because everybody picked on Dan Quell. Or if it ends in certain letter combinations, so CH, SH, SS, or X, you're also going to use that ES. And you're very familiar with the way those things sound, right? So church and class. How am I going to make that plural when it ends in an S? I'm going to put that ES at the end and separate that out. So churches, classes, right? So now we can hear that plural form. IES, that's another one. So with things often, typically you'll see that when it ends in Y. And this kind of relates to what we did yesterday, right? When we're talking about suffixes and prefixes, sometimes you have to change the root of the word. And in case of plurals, sometimes you have to do that. So cities and bodies, right? City, body, I'm going to drop that Y, I'm going to add IES and make it plural. Now, sometimes you don't, because English. So sometimes instead of dropping the Y and adding IES, we just add the S at the end. And that's just a matter of remembering, right? There's, it's, you know, this case, right? Y's after a vowel, right? So if the Y comes after a consonant, you tend to use IES. If it comes after a vowel, you just add the S. So boys, days, right? Adding the S to boy and day, make it plural. Some other fun ones, right? We don't say knives, we say knives. Shelves, we don't say that, we say shelves. So a lot of times if it ends in an F, we drop the F and we add VES, okay? And then some nouns just change form, which is also fun, right? So these are not collective nouns, they are plural nouns. Most commonly, woman, man, child. So women, children, men. We just changed the form of it. Goose, we changed to geese for a plural. And then some nouns we don't change at all. So if you have a group of deer, you have one deer or you have a group of deer. You have one moose or you have a group of moose. And fish. So, and those are where it gets a little tricky, right? Because you just have to be familiar with the idea and understand that sometimes they just do not change form at all. But through class, we're not going to encounter, you know, you can take a breath here because it's not, you're not going to encounter it very often in class, and you could certainly avoid it when you're writing. If you're ever, this is what I tell the students too, if something doesn't feel right to you when you're writing, just change it to something you're more comfortable with that you know that works. All right, and then those collective nouns, right? So they represent a group of people but as a whole, they're considered singular. And a great, idea there, the Army fights, right? And that's subject verb agreement as well that they're adding there by adding fights as a verb. Army, doesn't matter. It could be a 1,000,000-man army. It's just an army. If you have more than one army, then you change it to, ARMIES. But a plural would be when you talked about the individual soldiers. So if you have a group of soldiers, that's plural. And then they use jury again. And then see here's an interesting one, right? So the team, they're just talking about the entire unit, the entire group of players. But if you were to talk about them as a whole without the team, then you would use players, right? And you could easily insert either the players head to the field, which would be correct. You're talking about them as individuals together, or that single idea of the team. So you would also say the team heads to the field. One or the other will work in that instance. And this is something a lot of times just takes some practice here. So I'm going to skip this because it's just talking about the form of the questions take. We're going to have like a small paragraph where we have drop-down boxes that gives us choices to use. So we can just pass over that. And then I will open, there it is, quiz. Okay, and there's our same tables. I will add that to Google Classroom. See if I can save that now. Yeah. And test taking. So collective nouns. Some rules I have here. Collective nouns are singular more often than plural. You can almost guarantee that they will be singular forms most of the time. For clearer writing, use a word such as members to indicate plural. For example, some group members attend the yearly meeting. So, if everybody in the group attended the meeting, you would say, the group attends the meeting. But if it's only particular people from that group, that's when you'd want to use the plural. And so we got our first question. Nautica, you have a question there?
Yes. Okay. So on my Paxton screen, I went to the student book, but there is no quiz that popped up. Is that because I zipped out of it when I first took the practice test?
Oh, okay. So yeah, it might not be available. We'll have to see if we can get that turned on for you. Because if you took that assessment, sometimes it takes away some of the assignments. So I'll have to see if I can get that reloaded for you. I think Rachel might be the admin there that has to do that. But I will check after class and see if I can get that set up for you. Let me make a note of that. Yeah, so just pay attention to the screen for now, and I'll check on lessons here.
Okay.
For Paxton. And it might be all for naught anyway, because if we get you an essential, then you won't have to worry so much about Paxton anyway. So number one here. The company believes that its employees are hardworking. Jessica, so what correction will we need to make here to make this sentence actually jive?
Would it be B?
B is I just realized those are all out of sequence.
It's an employee to employees. C.
C. Yeah. So we have to change. So we need another E to make that correct. So that's one that I really didn't cover too well in the table, but right. So employee, we need to have another S there. So the company believes that its employees are hardworking. So C, and that's lovely. I don't know why those are out of order, but C is in cat there for number one. And this is what I was talking about. So I'll read through here and calling you guys as we go here to answer some questions for us. So let's see here. Yeah, no, I think we dealt with this before, didn't we? With some crazy stuff in Paxson in the past. So we have the small letter here, and then we'll have to correct some verb forms when we get to the drop-down boxes. So it says, I'm sure your office receives many calls and letters asking about the league's various policies. Delasha, what do we want to change that to?
Policies, D.
D, policies, right? So
Yeah.
is that rule, right, where we have a consonant and then we have a Y. So we're going to use IES. So policies regarding player salaries. I am hoping that you can provide some information that will help explain how the league determines the amount each player makes a year and the amount each team could spend on players. For many fans like me, salary cap is very confusing. It seems as though some player salaries don't match the contribution that they make to their teams. The cap also seems to limit unfairly the amount a team could spend on players. For example, why can't my home team, Miami Heat, spend what it wants on salaries? Mariama, I'd like to give that one a try.
A.
A, the Miami Heat. We have to capitalize both words. Yeah, so B, but you're on the right track, right? So that's something, I also didn't mention. So sports teams, right? That's another type of capitalization, specific team. If I'm talking about, just a football team or a basketball team, I wouldn't. But in this case, as we're dealing with a particular team from a particular location, we're going to use Miami Heat, capitalize that. So it spends what it wants on salaries if it has the money to spend. I have done some research on the salary cap, and I know that it is negotiated yearly as part of the collective bargaining agreement that provides team owners with rules about how they can negotiate member salaries. I also understand that the salary cap is based on how much revenue the league took in during the previous year. Is team revenue factored in? Are there ways for some teams to spend more money than others? Nilda, so you're with us there. Why don't you give that one a try?
C.
Which one was that?
C.
D. So it's C.
No, C.
C. Yeah. So that's one of those rules, right? If it's a vowel and then a Y, we typically just add S. If there's a consonant before the Y, we would do the IES thing. But here, just simply going with the addition of the S. Yeah. So ways for teams to spend more money than others. I know that the league weighs many factors when determining salary. Nautica, you want to give that a try?
It's A.
A, league weighs. Yeah. So they actually add league members weighs, which is incorrect. That's subject verb agreement problem there, by the way. But yeah, so we is our noun, and it's singular, right? Because collective noun. is in singular form. And then ways, when we're going to talk about subject-verb agreement, we need a singular verb. And confusingly enough, most of the time with singular verbs, we actually add an S. So that's a little sidebar there. If we were talking about multiple leagues, then we eliminate the S. So we would say, I know that the leagues weigh many factors when determining salary. So it flips. Whichever, a singular noun typically has an S. Singular verb typically has an S. Singular nouns do not. Plural nouns have an S. Plural verbs do not. So, and that just kind of helps. When you hear it, right? That's a lot of times I always tell everybody, does it just sound right? Can you basically say it's like, say it in your head, and a lot of times you'll come up with the correct answer. So a league ways, right? So we should have correct answers across the board. And so we'll jump to the essential ed lesson now. And if you move over there, so in our RLA language, I've assigned you subjects and verbs, which is the first lesson in the basic sentence construction. So now applying a little bit of what we learned about nouns, whether it's singular or plural nouns, and then expanding on that a little bit, and now talking and thinking about constructing simple sentences.
I'm just getting my trash can.
Oh, hold on a second here. I'm going to stop sharing real quick because I'm not sure I shared my audio with you guys. So let me share sound. Here we go.
Lesson. It's called About Subjects and Verbs. This lesson will teach you about the fundamental parts of a sentence, the subject and the verb.
Yep, got to have both of those to make a simple sentence.
It's always best to start at the beginning. And when you're talking about sentences, the beginning is subjects and verbs. That's the core of a sentence, its center. A subject is a noun, a person, place, thing, or idea. And a sentence tells what the subject does or what the subject is. That's the verb. So that's the core of the sentence, what the subject does or is. When I was first learning English, I didn't have a strong idea of grammar. One of the first things I had to write in English was a complaint letter. I didn't have a lot of money, but I had to buy a heater because the winter was so cold. Then it burned out right away, and what was I going to do? I didn't have any money to buy another one. Well, I wrote a complaint letter, and I'm really glad I had an English teacher to help me fix my mistakes. I had incomplete sentences and unclear sentences, and what really helped me focus was to write simple sentences around a subject and a verb. The company replaced my heater, and I learned some important information about grammar. Learning another language helped me understand grammar better, and that improved my writing in both English and Spanish. Are you ready to learn some basics about subjects and verbs?
Yeah, so we can also say a complete sentence has a subject verb predicate, which tends to include the verb as well. But you have to have a subject, right? And that subject is doing an action. And then there's typically something that is receiving the action, right? Which is part of the predicate. Let's take a look here.
Let's start by talking about the subject. The subject is what the sentence is about. A simple subject is just a noun, like this sentence. The dog barked all night. The subject is dog. That's pretty easy to find, right? And it's got a descriptive word, the. The words the, a, and an are called articles, and they're used with nouns. A or an means just one thing, and the means a particular thing. So a particular dog barked all night. Well, as sentences and ideas get more complicated, subjects can too. You can have a lot of words that describe the subject before you get to what the subject is actually doing. So you could have a sentence like this one. The gray dog with white spots barked all night. The words gray and with white spots describe what the dog is like. They're part of the whole subject of the sentence, but there's still one noun at the center of the subject, dog. The sentence just gives more specific information. The gray dog with white spots. Sometimes there's other information at the beginning of the sentence too, like this. For the last 3 nights, the gray dog with white spots barked all night. The phrase "for the last 3 nights" describes when things happened. It's not part of the subject because it doesn't describe the dog. The subject is still the gray dog with white spots. Now, a dog is a thing. It's easy to identify it as a noun and as a subject. Sometimes you're talking about something more abstract, like an idea or a time or an activity. Take a look at this sentence. Starting a new job can be very stressful. What's the subject here? What's the sentence talking about? You might think job is the subject because it's a noun, but really the phrase a new job is describing starting. You might know that to start is a verb, but an ing form of a verb can be used as a noun. The whole subject is starting a new job, and the subject noun is starting. The sentence is saying that starting can be stressful. Sometimes when you write, you should ask yourself, is this the best subject? Does it make the sentence too complicated? Is it what I really mean? You might consider rewriting a sentence like this to say, a new job can be very stressful. That's a simpler sentence, if it still shows your meaning.
Yeah, so you can have different ideas for a subject, right? Typically, it's going to be a noun of some sort. Sometimes it can be a verb. And you also have to be careful as far as where it's located. So like it said before, you can have introductory phrases and clauses. A lot of times that will be an indication of time, like, yesterday, comma, right? That's a simple one. I had a sandwich for lunch, right? I is the subject there. Or, more complicated ones. There's other sort of transitional phrases that may start a sentence. Furthermore, nevertheless, in conclusion, there's all kinds of these. Not part of the subject. So you have to make sure that you're careful, about locating the subject. And also, you get into these, kind of weird sentence structures and everything that are weak. We call them sometimes passive sentences, where the subject is located in a weird spot and you use what's known as be verbs and not using action verbs, right? Action verbs are directly stating an action and the subject is directing that action, or it's the action is directed towards the predicate, the thing that is receiving the action. So let's take a look here, what we got next.
Now it's time to try identifying the subject of a pretty complicated sentence. Which word in the sentence is the main subject noun?
All right. Yeah. So now a more complex sentence. During the fall of 2001, approximately 3.6 million teachers taught in elementary and secondary school classrooms. Jessica, where is our main subject? What noun here is our main subject?
The teachers.
Teachers. Yeah, right to it, right? So and that's buried about halfway through the sentence because we have that introductory phrase at the beginning, during the fall of 2001. So we're locating the time that this happened, right? During the fall of 2001. Then we have more information still, approximately 3.6 million teachers. So it's telling us, it's giving us an amount of teachers. Teachers, however, that's our subject, taught in elementary and secondary school classrooms. So the verb, the active verb here, taught, right? And the operative verb, taught in elementary and secondary school classrooms. So elementary and secondary school classrooms is what's receiving that action in that sentence. So,
Great job! The main noun at the center of the subject is teachers. The full subject is approximately 3.6 million teachers. The phrase approximately 3.6 million describes the teachers.
Yeah, so descriptive phrase. So we start off with an introductory phrase, and then we have some description of the subject. So the full subject would be approximately 3.6 million teachers, but teachers is the operative noun there.
The verb is another important part of a sentence. The verb describes what the subject does or what the subject is. Let's take a look at a simple sentence again. The dog barked all night. The word barked is the verb. It's an action word that describes what the dog did. That's the simple story. But verbs are complicated. Just like you have a full subject and a subject noun at the center of it, a sentence has a full predicate with a verb at the center of it. The predicate describes when, what, why, and how the action took place. It's everything except the subject. So, barked all night is the predicate of this sentence. All night describes when the dog barked. Take a look at a more complicated sentence. Farmers grow rice by flooding the rice paddies to 1/3 the height of a rice stalk. The subject is pretty simple in this sentence. It's farmers. That's who's doing something. What are the farmers doing? Growing rice. The verb is grow. Rice describes what the farmers grow, and by flooding the rice paddies to 1/3 the height of a rice stalk, describes how the farmers grow something. Most of this sentence is the predicate. Grow rice by flooding the rice paddies to 1/3 the height of a rice stalk. All of that is describing.
So here's a good place to sort of flush this idea out. Great writers mix between simple sentences and more complex sentences. It sounds odd, but it actually it engages the reader, and it makes your writing flow a lot better. You could have 2 or 3 simple sentences out of this one longer, more complex sentence, right? Farmers grow rice, period. You have enough there to make a sentence. Farmers grow rice. You could change that next part. They flood rice paddies to 1/3 the height of a rice stalk. So you could make 2 sentences out of that. But you can also combine and have a more complex sentence. Farmers grow rice by flooding the rice paddies to 1/3 the height of a rice stalk. If you use too many simple sentences, your writing is choppy, right? And it doesn't flow very well. If there's simple ideas that you can combine that are related, you get a little more of a flow, right? And it just sounds better reading it, sounds better in your head, and of course it also sounds better if you're speaking it.
Try identifying
That we didn't finish the
verb is another.
right.
It's farmers. That's rice describes how the farmers grow something. Most of this sentence is the predicate. Grow rice by flooding the rice paddies to 1/3 the height of a rice stalk. All of that is describing what the farmers do, and the verb grow is the center of the predicate. One more thing to be aware of is the different forms of verbs. Verbs have different forms to show when or how they happen, and sometimes that involves what's called a helping verb like will or have. Verbs have helping verbs that show when they happen, plus we add helping verbs that modify the meaning like might, could, should, or would. These words are called modals. So look at this sentence. She could have stolen the ring yesterday. The main verb is stolen. Have stolen shows that it took place in the past. Could have stolen shows that it's not something that definitely happened, just something that's possible. The whole verb is could have stolen. The whole predicate is could have stolen the ring yesterday. In the resources, you'll find information about verb forms and helping words.
And I'll post those on Google Classroom as well. But as it shows here, we have yeah. So as I mentioned, talking about you have past, present, and future. Your helping verbs tend to show up in future tense. I will eat dinner at 6 o'clock, right? Because that sentence doesn't make sense. I eat dinner at 6 o'clock. That's a statement that that I do that every day. But in this case, when I say I will eat dinner at 6 o'clock, is telling you that that's what I'm going to do in the future. And of course, with past tense, a lot of times our verbs get ed at the end, right? So to show that that happened in the past. So it's the I will work tomorrow, right? Which would be future tense. I would say I worked yesterday, which is sort of their example there. And then there's obviously different. There's the perfect form, and then continuous. And we're going to get into this a little more deeply. There's other lessons that'll deal with this as well, but this is good information here to help you with those verb tenses. And regular and irregular verbs, because once again, English, which much like those other ones with the nouns, you have regular endings, common irregular verbs. So these change form, right? So your simple present form of write, like the action of scribing something, W-R-I-T-E or W-R-I-T-E-S, depending on the subject and verb. Wrote, right, is that simple past form, and then will write is the simple future. And you see all of these, right? So irregular verbs are ones that change form based on the tense in which they're used. And then we have a list of regular, common, irregular verbs that also change forms here. So again, we're going to get into that with more detail, but those are also going to be available for you on Google Classroom. I will post those tables. And then modals, like I said, are a kind of helping verb, adds meaning to the verb. So they don't typically change forms, but they change the form of the rest of the verb. They're used with another main verb. And it's a modifier, right? So it tells you, it like it says here, so a modal like can is that I am able to. So can you jump over that stream, or I can eat a whole pizza? Could, right? So like their version there, could it have been a blue car? She could be older than I thought. You would use those because it's a possibility, right? So I would say otherwise, she is older than I thought, because that's definite statement, right? That definitely is, she is older than I thought. But adding could means that it could be possible she's older than I thought. And there's a list here: might, must, shall, right? So you understand how we use those, right? It qualifies that verb, and typically it sort of softens them. They're less than definitive statements, right? If that makes sense. I use those if I'm making suggestions, or possibly things are happening, or also we're going to run into verbs like must or might when it comes to generalization, right? So if you're making a generalization, you may use something like that because you're talking about a group of people and you're making a distinction between many or all. But anyway, that's going to be down the road as well. So let's keep going here.
Try identifying the verb in a sentence. Which word or words is the verb plus any helping verbs?
All right. So our first little question here, let's see. Let's go to Jessica. Pick on you again. So it states here, after playing cards, the three children decided to build a house of cards. So what is our verb that starts our predicate here?
I'm gonna take a guess. And I'm gonna say decided.
Good job. Yeah. You do decided to build. That is to build is not a helping verb, right? If they said the three children will decide to build a house of cards, will would be a type of helping verb. But their action, right, is deciding to build. Build, of course, is another verb, but the one we're focusing on here, right? What action are the three children taking? They haven't built anything yet. They are deciding to build it. So that is their action.
Great job! The verb is decided. That's the action word that describes what the children did. The subject is the three children. The predicate is after playing cards and decided to build a house of cards. That describes when and what the children decided. Okay, let's put together what you've learned about subjects and verbs. Every sentence needs a subject plus a verb to be complete. When subjects and verbs get complicated, they can look like complete sentences even though they're not. So it's important to be able to identify if a sentence has both a subject and a verb. Take a look at this example. Running for mayor of a small town in Ohio. What's the verb in this sentence? There isn't one. The word running is used as a noun. It's the main subject. The words for mayor of a small town in Ohio describe the subject. So there's just a subject in this sentence and no verb. What's it saying about running for mayor? Nothing. That means it's an incomplete sentence. Now take a look at this example. In the mountains of Peru at the end of the 20th century. What's the subject of this sentence? What's the verb? Well, really, it doesn't have either. It's part of a predicate that describes where and when, but it doesn't tell what happened in the mountains of Peru at the end of the 20th century. Here's another example. Most of the employees going on the trip. Is that a complete sentence? Well, it has a subject. Most is a subject, and of the employees describes that. What about going on the trip? That sort of describes something the subject does, but really it's not a verb that can stand on its own. Going, without a helping verb, isn't a complete verb. You can only use it to describe the subject, not as a verb on its own. The sentence would be complete if you added the helping verb are. Most of the employees are going on the trip. Or you could use going on the trip to describe the employees and add a predicate. Most of the employees going on the trip are on time. Now take a look at this example. Joe slept. That's very short. Does it have a subject? Yes, Joe. Does it have a verb? Yes, slept. Does it tell what happened? Yes, it's a complete sentence. Do you think you can tell if a sentence has a subject and a verb?
Yeah, so occasionally, right, we get into super little sentences that are grammatically correct and are perfect to use. In this case, you don't need anything else other than your subject and your verb, right? Because what Joe is doing is described with slept. I want to kind of go back here. So yeah, like this here, running for mayor of a small town in Ohio, right? You're going to run into these. You're going to ask yourself, right? It's like, who is running for mayor, right? There's no subject there. So if I said, Steve is running for mayor of a small town in Ohio, now you have your complete sentence. I have Steve as my subject at the beginning there. Where's the other one here? Yeah, in the mountains of Peru at the end of the 20th century. That tells me nothing, right? There's nothing there that's, I'm not learning anything. There's no information. Something about the mountains of Peru. Something happening at the end of the 20th century. And this would have to be a fairly complicated sentence. So you could start that in the mountains of Peru. Archaeologists discovered a remnants of an ancient civilization at the end of the 20th century, right? That's, even with much information as I already have there, you would need that much more to actually make that a complete sentence. But, you have a location, which is also a way that you could start a sentence. Like I was talking about, you could say at the end of the 20th century, comma, you could start the sentence with that as well. So usually those introductory phrases and clauses will either give you, a location or a time that something is taking place, right? So incomplete there. And then, like they said here, there's several ways that you could fix that. But again, most of the employees going on the trip, there's just not enough there. There's, what are they doing? Okay, they're going on the trip, but what are most of the employees doing once they get there, or something? So asking questions about sentences like that will help you understand whether or not it's a complete idea. And then a very simple one, Joe slept. That's completely fine, because it has, even though it doesn't have anything else other than a subject and a verb, it tells us everything we need to know about Joe. We could, of course, add more to that too. We could say Joe slept badly, Joe slept soundly, whatever it may be. But even with just that, we have a complete sentence.
Try some practice. Which answer choice is a complete sentence?
All right, which answer choice is a complete sentence? Delasha, I'll ask you, which of these sentences do we have a whole thought?
It's early every morning, my cat began crying for food.
Yep, you got it. That's another way to think of a complete sentence. It is a complete thought, right? There's nothing missing there to make a complete thought. When we speak conversationally with other people, sometimes we don't use complete sentences. But if you're dealing with a reader that doesn't have the context, doesn't have everything, all the information, you have to make sure that you have your subject and verb and your predicate in those cases. So that introductory phrase tells us when that event's happening, right? Early every morning, something's happening. What's happening? My cat, the subject, my cat, began crying for food. Began crying for food. So crying's the verb, began is the helping verb with that, began crying for food. The other ones here, right? Giving a speech in front of a large audience. No, there's not a complete thought there. We need something else. Giving a speech in front of a large audience, Mary felt nervous, something like that. Every one of the passengers arriving at the train station. Okay, what did they do? That's not a complete idea. Every one of the passengers arriving at the train station was early or something. You got to have something there. Many years before World War II, during the war, to end all wars. That's two basically sort of introductory phrases. Many years before World War II, okay, you could start a sentence with that. You could also start a sentence with during the war to end all wars, which that's actually refers to World War I believe. So that leaves.
Great job.
Yeah.
This sentence has a subject, my cat, and a verb, began. It tells what the cat began to do, crying for food, and also when, early every morning.
There you go. Yep. So the action began is when, so that's the verb. My cat's the subject. What was it doing? That's the rest of the predicate there, crying for food. And then we finish off with when that was happening. So a more complex idea. You could say, you know, again, that's a much more a better flow for a sentence than trying to chop it up into smaller sentences. That's what we're going to start working on and help build your writing skills. And I think we're probably here at the
Very good work on those exercises. Now it's time to do some practice. You can show what you've learned and maybe learn even more. I have 8 questions that you can answer, but you know, I think if you can answer the first 3 correct, it shows you really understand. Then you can go on to the next lesson. Or if you get some wrong, that's okay. You'll just go on to the next questions. If you have any trouble, use the review buttons to improve your learning.
All right, so if you guys are there, I'll give you guys about 10 minutes to get through, because these are fairly simple, just sentences, you know, it's not gonna be like large passages or anything. So take about 10 minutes to finish up the lesson, and then we'll kind of come back together and finish off the class here. So around 2:50, and I'm here if you guys got any questions. And I'll pause. Have any questions during the day at any time, except maybe 10 o'clock at night. But anything after class, if you're running into any issues technical wise, or you have a question regarding anything that came up in class, feel free to text me and I'd be glad to go over it with you. So just kind of feeling our way through the first 2 days. We'll get everything kind of all the kinks worked out. It should be good by Monday. Yeah, it's a new system for us, new program, so just try to work everything out. Just kind of filling in here, thinking about sentences. Again, we want to get to a point where we're able to build more complex sentences. We're going to encounter those more when it comes to our RLA language and our RLA reading classes. And it will overlap with social studies and even with science to some degree, because I know you guys do a lot of reading in there as well. So any questions on the lessons today, either social studies, language arts, any other technical difficulties or anything we can work through before we take a break for the weekend?
Mr. Matt,
Yeah.
so what I'd want to do, because like I explained to you, I'm just now getting going on the site. I'm going to go through and get caught up. So by Monday, because I think everything is okay. It's like, so what I've been doing, I've been following the lessons as well. So when you told us to go ahead and take the 10 minutes, I got to get caught up with everything so that I can even get to the assignments as far as the lessons, because it's just not getting open. So if I have any issues, so that's what I plan on doing the rest of the day. If I have any issues, I'll call you this evening before, like you said, before 10, and let you know that I've finished out what I needed to finish out. And if there's something going on where I can't get my assignments, I would definitely call you and let you know what's going on. But that's my plan, to get caught up and make sure I know what I'm doing.
And it's probably, you're probably not nearly as far behind as you may even think. Lessons are not very long. So, and again, yeah, if you have any problems, just let me know. And by Monday, like I said, Rachel and I always talk on Friday. So if we run into any issues or making sure that everything is running smoothly by Monday and making sure everybody's on the same page. I think we're getting there, though. I think we're a lot closer than we were at even the start of today at noon. So yeah, but again, if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to reach out to me. And otherwise, you guys have a good weekend, and I will see you guys Monday. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay.